Naomi Roberts stood frozen in the doorway of her father's beloved bookstore, watching strangers box up her entire childhood. Her beautiful dark skin had gone ashen, her usually bright brown eyes wide with disbelief. 3 men in work clothes were carefully wrapping her father's rare first edition books that had taken him 30 years to collect. Books that were supposed to be hers now. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" The oldest worker looked up from a box of vintage leather-bound novels. "Moving day, ma'am. New owner wants everything out by tonight." "New owner?" The words felt foreign in her mouth. There must be some mistake. "I'm Eleanor Roberts' daughter. This is my father's store." The man pulled out a crumpled work order. "Says here Richard Roberts signed the paperwork. Everything's been sold, the building, the inventory, even the personal items upstairs." Naomi felt the world tilt. She grabbed the door frame to steady herself. Richard, her husband of 5 years. The man who had held her while she cried at her father's funeral just 2 weeks ago. The man who promised he would help her turn her father's bookstore into the memorial library she had always dreamed of. "When?" she managed to ask. "Sale went through 3 days ago," the worker said, not unkindly. "Sorry, miss. We're just doing our job." 3 days ago. While she was still wearing black dresses and accepting casseroles from neighbors. While she was still crying herself to sleep every night, missing her father's warm laugh and gentle advice. While she was planning how to honor his memory by sharing his beloved books with the community he had served for decades. Naomi walked deeper into the store, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors her father had polished himself every Sunday. The men had already packed most of the main floor. Empty shelves stared back at her like missing teeth. The reading corner where her father used to tell her stories was bare except for dust outlines where furniture used to sit. She climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above the store where her father had lived. More strangers were there, wrapping her father's personal belongings. His favorite coffee mug, the one that said "World's Best Dad," that she had given him when she was 7. His reading glasses. The framed photo of her mother who had died when Naomi was 12. Everything that made this place feel like home was being stuffed into boxes by people who didn't know its worth. "Stop," she said louder now. "Please just stop." The workers looked at each other uncomfortably. The supervisor, a kind-looking woman with gray hair, approached her carefully. "Honey, I know this is hard," she said gently. "But we have our orders. The new owner paid good money for everything, contents included. Your husband signed papers saying he had the right to sell." "He didn't have the right," Naomi said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "My father left everything to me. I have the will." The supervisor shook her head sadly. "Doesn't matter now, sweetie. Once money changes hands and contracts are signed, it's legal. Your husband presented himself as having authority to sell." Naomi felt sick. She thought about the past few weeks. How Richard had been so supportive, so caring. How he had handled all the funeral arrangements while she grieved. How he had told her not to worry about paperwork and legal matters while she was hurting. She had been grateful for his help. She had trusted him completely. Now she realized he hadn't been protecting her from stress. He had been protecting himself from getting caught. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Richard. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same thing. "The new owner?" she asked the supervisor. "Who is he?" "Some businessman from downtown. Gabriel Stone, I think the name was. Paid cash, no questions asked." Naomi felt rage building in her chest. Some stranger now owned her father's life work. Some man she had never met held the keys to every memory she had of the man who raised her alone after her mother died. Every bedtime story, every afternoon spent organizing books, every lesson about treating customers like family, all of it was being packed away like garbage. She watched them carry out her father's desk, the one where he had taught her to do homework every day after school. They had the box with his reading journals, where he had written notes about every book he had read. 30 years of thoughts and ideas, being carried away by strangers. "I need to call my lawyer," she said, more to herself than anyone else. But even as she said it, she knew it was probably too late. Richard had clearly planned this carefully. He had waited until she was at her weakest, when grief made it hard to think clearly. He had used her trust and her pain against her. The supervisor handed her a business card. "If you want to contact the new owner, his number's on there. Maybe you can work something out." Naomi took the card with numb fingers. Gabriel Stone, it read. Real estate investments. As she walked back downstairs, she passed her father's old cash register. The workers had already unplugged it, but she could still remember the sound it made every time her father made a sale. He had always been so proud of his little bookstore. He had built it from nothing, book by book, customer by customer. Your father seems like he was a good man, the kind supervisor said, following her downstairs. This place has real character. You can tell it was loved. It was, Naomi whispered. It was everything to him. And to me. She stood there watching strangers erase her father's legacy while her husband remained unreachable. The man she had married, the man she had shared her dreams with, had sold her inheritance while she was crying at her father's grave. But as she watched the last of her father's books disappear into boxes, something cold and hard settled in her chest. Richard thought he could steal from her while she was weak. He thought her grief made her helpless. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Naomi sat in her car outside the empty bookstore for 2 hours, calling Richard over and over. By the time he finally answered, the moving trucks were gone and the building stood hollow against the evening sky. "Hey babe," Richard's voice came through the phone, casual as if nothing had happened. "How was your day?" "How was my day?" Naomi's voice was deadly quiet. "Richard, where are you?" "At work, finishing up some projects." "What? You sound upset." "I'm sitting outside my father's bookstore. Or I should say, I'm sitting outside the empty building where my father's bookstore used to be." Silence stretched between them. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Naomi, I can explain. You sold it." The words came out flat and cold. "You sold my father's bookstore. Everything. While I was grieving." "I had to," Richard said quickly. "Baby, we were in serious trouble. The debts were piling up and I didn't know what else to do." "What debts?" Naomi gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. "We don't have any debts. I handle our finances." Another long pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice was smaller. "There are some things I haven't told you." Naomi closed her eyes. "Come home. Now. We're going to talk about this face to face." "I can't right now. I'm in the middle of something important." "More important than explaining why you stole my inheritance?" "I didn't steal anything." Richard's voice rose. "I'm your husband. What's yours is mine, right? That's what marriage means." Naomi felt something break inside her chest. "No, Richard. That's not what marriage means. Marriage means partnership. Trust. It doesn't mean you get to destroy everything I love while I'm too sad to stop you." She hung up and drove home to their small house across town. She needed to see the paperwork to understand exactly what Richard had done. Maybe there was still a way to fix this. At home, she went straight to Richard's office. He usually kept it locked, but today the door was open. His desk was messier than usual, covered with papers and what looked like bills. Naomi started reading, and with each piece of paper, her heart sank deeper. Credit card bills. Gambling debts. Loan papers. Richard owed money everywhere: casinos, online betting sites, private lenders with names that sounded dangerous. The amounts were staggering. 40,000 here, 30,000 there. How had he hidden this from her? Then she found the real estate paperwork. Her father's property had sold for $300,000. A fair price, maybe even good for the neighborhood. But none of that money had gone to pay down their mortgage or credit cards. According to the bank statement, Richard had immediately transferred it all to something called Stone Enterprises. She was still reading when she heard Richard's key in the front door. He came into the office looking guilty and defeated. "You found it all?" he said, slumping into a chair. "Stone Enterprises," Naomi said, holding up the bank statement. "That's not a debt payment. That's the buyer, isn't it? You didn't just sell my father's store to pay your gambling debts. You sold it directly to this Gabriel Stone person." Richard wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's complicated. Make it simple." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I got in deep with some people. Bad people. They were going to hurt me if I didn't pay up. I needed cash fast, more than any bank would loan me. So you stole from your grieving wife. I borrowed against our future." Richard stood up, suddenly angry. "I was going to buy it back once I got my feet under me. The guy said he'd sell it back to us in a year or two." "What guy? Gabriel Stone?" Richard shook his head. "No, that's just the name on the papers. The real buyer is someone else. Someone who knew about your father's store and knew what it was worth." Naomi felt cold. "Who?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. Finally he said, "Tiffany Morgan. She's a real estate agent. She helped me set up the sale." "A real estate agent helped you commit fraud against your wife?" Naomi couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Richard, I could have you arrested for this. You forged my signature, didn't you?" He nodded miserably. "Tiffany said it would be fine. She said married couples do it all the time." "Where is this Tiffany person now?" Richard looked even more uncomfortable. She's someone I've been seeing. The words hit Naomi like a physical blow. She sat down hard in Richard's desk chair, staring at him. You're cheating on me. It just happened, Richard said quickly. You were so sad after your father died and Tiffany was there and she understood what I was going through with the debts. What you were going through? Naomi's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more rage than any scream. What about what I was going through? I lost my father, Richard. The most important person in my world died, and instead of supporting me, you were sleeping with some woman and plotting to steal everything he left me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Richard said, starting to cry. The plan was to fix everything quietly. Pay off the debts, get my life back on track, and then tell you everything. But it got complicated. Because you fell in love with your accomplice? Richard didn't answer, which was answer enough. Naomi stood up slowly. She looked at this man she had married, this person she had trusted with her whole heart, and realized she had never really known him at all. Pack a bag, she said quietly. What? Pack a bag and get out of my house. Tonight. Naomi, please, we can work this out. I love you. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You love me? You destroyed my father's legacy while I was crying at his funeral. You cheated on me with the woman who helped you do it. That's not love, Richard. That's betrayal on a level I didn't even know was possible. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. Go stay with your girlfriend. Go stay with one of your gambling buddies. Go sleep in your car. But you're not staying here another night. Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Naomi's face stopped him. He went to their bedroom and started throwing clothes into a suitcase while she watched from the doorway. The divorce papers will be ready Monday, she said as he zipped up his bag. Don't do this, he pleaded. We can get counseling. We can work through this. No, Naomi said firmly. We can't. You don't steal from someone you love. You don't lie to someone you respect. And you definitely don't cheat on someone while they're grieving their father. After Richard left, Naomi sat alone in her quiet house, holding the business card for Gabriel Stone, the stranger who now owned everything her father had worked for. Tomorrow she would call him and see if there was any way to undo what Richard and his mistress had done. But tonight she let herself cry. Not just for her father anymore, but for the marriage that had apparently been a lie, and for the trust that could never be repaired. Gabriel Stone's office was on the 20th floor of a glass building downtown. Naomi had called 3 times before he agreed to meet with her, and only after she explained that she was Eleanor Roberts' daughter. Even then he had sounded reluctant. She dressed carefully for the meeting, her best black suit and her father's vintage watch, the only thing of his she still had. She wanted to look professional, strong, not like the broken woman Richard had left behind. The receptionist led her to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Gabriel Stone stood when she entered, and Naomi was surprised by what she saw. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 40, with kind brown eyes and graying temples. He wore an expensive suit but didn't carry himself like the cold businessman she had imagined. Ms. Roberts, he said, extending his hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man. Naomi shook his hand, confused by his tone. You knew my father? Not personally, but I knew of him. Please sit down. Gabriel gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. I've been a customer of his store for years. He special ordered books for me, helped me find rare editions for my collection. This wasn't what Naomi had expected. She had come here prepared to face a cold corporate raider, not someone who spoke of her father with genuine respect. Then you understand what you bought, she said carefully. It wasn't just a building and inventory. It was a legacy. Gabriel's expression grew sad. I do understand. That's why I'm confused about why your husband wanted to sell it so quickly. My husband had gambling debts, Naomi said bluntly. He sold my inheritance without my knowledge while I was grieving. I'm here to see if there's any way to undo the sale. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, studying her. I see. That explains a lot about our conversations. Your husband seemed very eager to close quickly, no questions asked. What did he tell you? That you needed to sell immediately for financial reasons. That the grief was too much and you couldn't bear to keep the store. Gabriel paused. He said you never wanted to see the place again. Naomi felt anger rise in her throat. That's the opposite of the truth. I was planning to turn it into a community library and reading center. My father always wanted to do something like that. I know, Gabriel said quietly. He mentioned that dream to me several times when I visited the store. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Gabriel opened a folder on his desk. Ms. Roberts, I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear. The person who arranged this sale wasn't your husband. Naomi frowned. What do you mean? Your husband was just the front man. The real seller was a woman named Tiffany Morgan. She's the one who contacted me, who negotiated the price, who handled all the details. Your husband just signed the papers. Tiffany is Richards. Naomi stopped herself. She didn't want to say the word mistress out loud to a stranger. His girlfriend, yes. I figured that out eventually. Gabriel's voice was grim. Ms. Morgan is known in real estate circles. She has a reputation for finding distressed properties and flipping them quickly for profit. Distressed properties? Properties where the owners are desperate to sell. Usually because of death, divorce, or financial trouble. Gabriel opened another folder. After your father passed away, Ms. Morgan somehow learned about the inheritance and your husband's gambling problems. She saw an opportunity. Naomi felt sick. She used his addiction and my grief to steal my father's store. It appears so. And she did it very cleverly. By having your husband sign the papers, she avoided any direct liability for fraud. If you try to prosecute, it will be your word against your husband's about whether he had permission to sell. But surely the forged signature. Gabriel shook his head. There's no forged signature. Your husband had legal authority as your spouse to make financial decisions during your period of grief, especially if he could claim it was an emergency. Ms. Morgan made sure everything was technically legal, even if it was morally wrong. Naomi slumped in her chair. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. Gabriel's voice had an edge to it now. Ms. Morgan may have been clever, but she made some assumptions that could work against her. What do you mean? Gabriel turned his computer screen toward her. It showed an email from Tiffany Morgan dated just 2 days after the sale. Read this, he said. The email was brief but damning. Mr. Stone, now that we've closed on the Roberts property, I wanted to discuss flipping it back to the market. I have buyers lined up who would pay significantly more than you paid. We could split the profits 50-50. Naomi looked up at Gabriel. She was planning to steal from you too. Exactly. Ms. Morgan assumed I was just another investor looking to make a quick buck. She thought I would jump at the chance to flip your father's store for a profit. Gabriel's expression hardened. She was wrong. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. I've been trying to figure out what really happened before I responded. Gabriel closed the laptop and looked directly at Naomi. Your father's store means something to this community. I've watched people discover new authors there, seen children fall in love with reading, witnessed strangers become friends over shared book recommendations. That's not something you destroy for money. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. That's exactly what my father believed. Which is why I want to help you get it back. The words hung in the air between them. Naomi stared at Gabriel, hardly daring to believe what she had heard. You want to help me? I bought your father's store to preserve it, not destroy it. When your husband contacted me about selling, I thought you genuinely needed to let it go. I was planning to maintain it as a bookstore and maybe expand the community programs your father had started. You were going to keep it as a bookstore? Gabriel smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Ms. Roberts, I didn't get into real estate to tear down landmarks. I got into it to preserve places that matter. Your father's store matters. Naomi felt hope stir in her chest, but she tried to keep her voice level. What are you proposing? A partnership, Gabriel said simply. You know the books, the customers, the vision your father had for the place. I have the business experience and the resources to make it happen. Together, we could create something even better than what was lost. But what about the sale? What about Tiffany and Richard? Gabriel's smile turned sharp. Oh, we're going to deal with them too. Ms. Morgan thinks she's been very clever, but she's about to learn that theft has consequences. Even when it's technically legal. For the first time since finding strangers packing up her father's store, Naomi felt something other than grief and rage. She felt hope. What do you have in mind? She asked. First, Gabriel said, opening another folder, we're going to let Ms. Morgan think her plan is working. Then we're going to give her exactly what she deserves. Over the next week, Gabriel and Naomi met every day to plan their strategy. They chose a small cafe near Gabriel's office, always sitting at the same corner table where they could speak privately. Gabriel brought folders full of documents, and Naomi brought her father's old journals and customer records. Tell me about Tiffany Morgan, Naomi said during their third meeting. What do you know about her business practices? Gabriel spread several papers across the table. More than I wish I did. After your father's store, I had my lawyer do some research. Tiffany Morgan has been involved in at least 6 similar deals in the past 2 years. Similar how? Properties sold quickly by desperate family members, usually during times of grief or financial crisis. She finds the vulnerable spots and exploits them. Gabriel pointed to a list of addresses. A widow who sold her late husband's garage after Tiffany convinced her son it was worthless. A man who sold his family's restaurant after his divorce, not knowing Tiffany was already negotiating with developers who would pay 3 times what he got. Naomi felt sick reading the details. She's done this before. Many times. And she's always careful to stay just inside the law. She finds people in emotional crisis, gains their trust through a family member or friend, then manipulates them into sales that benefit her more than them. How did she meet Richard? Gabriel pulled out another folder. Casino surveillance footage. My investigator found this. The photos showed Richard at a blackjack table looking stressed and desperate. In several images, a woman with blonde hair and red lipstick sat beside him, her hand on his arm, whispering in his ear. Tiffany, Naomi said. It wasn't a question. She frequents the same casinos where your husband gambled. My guess is she targeted him specifically after learning about your father's death and the inheritance. Naomi studied the photos. Richard looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, the way people look when addiction has taken control. But Tiffany looked polished and predatory, like a shark circling wounded prey. She seduced him on purpose. Almost certainly. Look at the timeline. Gabriel showed her a calendar marked with dates. Your father passed away on March 15th. These casino photos start on March 20th, just 5 days later. Tiffany was already working on Richard before your father was even buried. The cruelty of it took Naomi's breath away. While she was picking out flowers for her father's funeral, this woman was plotting to steal everything he had worked for. There's more, Gabriel said gently. My investigator talked to some of Richard's gambling buddies. According to them, Tiffany didn't just seduce your husband. She also increased his debts. What do you mean? She introduced him to higher stakes games. Private poker rooms where the buy-in was thousands instead of hundreds. She convinced him he could win big and pay off his smaller debts, but instead he just dug himself deeper. Naomi sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. She created the crisis she planned to solve. Exactly. And when Richard was desperate enough, she offered him a way out. All he had to do was sell your father's store. But why go through Richard at all? Why not approach me directly? Gabriel smiled grimly. Because you would have said no. Tiffany researched you too, Naomi. She knew you loved that store, knew you had plans for it. You would never have sold willingly, especially not to someone who wanted to destroy it. So she destroyed my marriage instead. She saw an opportunity and took it. Richard's gambling addiction made him vulnerable, and your grief made you temporarily unable to protect yourself. She exploited both. Naomi thought about the past few weeks. Richard's sudden attentiveness during her mourning period. His insistence on handling all the legal matters while she grieved. His unexplained absences that she had assumed were work-related. How long do you think they were planning this? Gabriel consulted his notes. Based on the evidence, I'd say at least 2 months. Tiffany was researching your father's property values in January, a full month before he passed away. The coldness of that fact hit Naomi like a slap. She was planning to steal from me before my father even died. It looks that way. Your father's health problems were well known in the neighborhood. Tiffany probably saw an opportunity coming and started positioning herself. Naomi felt rage building in her chest again, but this time it was cleaner, more focused. Richard had betrayed her, but he had also been manipulated. Tiffany Morgan was the real villain here. What's her endgame? Naomi asked. What does she want? Gabriel pulled out the email Tiffany had sent him. Money, obviously, but also reputation. If she can flip your father's store for a big profit, it establishes her as someone who can find and exploit valuable properties. She'll use your father's legacy to build her own business. Over my dead body. That's the spirit, Gabriel said with approval. Now, let's talk about how we're going to stop her. I'm listening. Gabriel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Tiffany thinks I'm just another greedy investor. She's expecting me to jump at her offer to flip the property for profit. What if we let her think that's exactly what I'm going to do? You want to make her think you're going along with her plan? Better than that. I want to make her think her plan is working so well that she gets greedy and overreaches herself. Naomi was beginning to see the possibilities. How? We're going to set up a meeting. I'll tell her I'm very interested in her flip proposal, but that I want to understand all the details before I commit. I'll ask her to explain exactly how she acquired the property and how she plans to maximize the profit. You want her to confess? On camera, Gabriel said with a slight smile. My office has security cameras in every conference room. If Tiffany admits to manipulating your husband and stealing your inheritance, we'll have evidence that even her lawyers can't explain away. Naomi felt excitement building. And then we destroy her. Legally and professionally. Real estate agents can lose their licenses for unethical behavior. And if we can prove fraud, she could face criminal charges. What about Richard? Gabriel's expression grew more serious. That's your choice, Naomi. He was a victim of Tiffany's manipulation, but he also betrayed you deeply. How you handle that relationship is up to you. Naomi thought about her husband crying in their bedroom, begging for forgiveness. Part of her felt sorry for him. He had clearly been out of his depth with someone like Tiffany Morgan. But he had also made choices. He had chosen to gamble away their security. He had chosen to have an affair. He had chosen to sign papers that would destroy her father's legacy. I'm divorcing him, she said firmly. But I won't try to have him arrested if he cooperates with our plan. Gabriel nodded approvingly. That's fair. And probably smart. We'll need his testimony to make the case against Tiffany stick. When do we start? Tomorrow, Gabriel said, closing his folders. I'm going to call Tiffany and tell her I'm ready to discuss her proposal. By the end of the week, we should have everything we need to bring her down. As they left the cafe, Naomi felt lighter than she had in weeks. She still missed her father terribly, and she was still hurt by Richard's betrayal. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had some control back. Tiffany Morgan had made a mistake when she decided to steal from Eleanor Roberts' daughter. She was about to learn that some people fight back. Gabriel's plan required careful timing and perfect acting. Over the weekend, he and Naomi rehearsed their strategy like actors preparing for opening night. They met at Gabriel's house, a comfortable craftsman-style home filled with books and vintage furniture that reminded Naomi painfully of her father's apartment above the store. The key, Gabriel explained as they sat in his living room, is to make Tiffany feel like she's in control. She needs to believe I'm just another mark she can manipulate. What if she suspects something? Naomi asked. What if she's researched you the way she researched my family? She has researched me, Gabriel said with a smile. But she only found what I wanted her to find. According to public records, I'm exactly what she thinks I am, a real estate investor who buys properties and flips them for profit. But that's not who you really are. Gabriel's expression grew more thoughtful. It's part of who I am. I do flip some properties, but I also preserve others. I've saved 3 historic buildings from demolition in the past 5 years, turned them into community centers and affordable housing. Why? Because some things are more valuable than money, Gabriel said simply. Your father's store is one of those things. Naomi studied his face. Gabriel Stone was different from any businessman she had ever met. He had money and power, but he used them to protect rather than exploit. She found herself trusting him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since before her father's death. Tell me about your plan, she said. Gabriel pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. First, I call Tiffany and tell her I'm interested in her flip proposal. I suggest we meet Wednesday afternoon to discuss details. What if she wants to meet somewhere else? Somewhere without cameras? She won't. Tiffany likes to feel important, and she'll want to impress me with her professionalism. She'll want to meet in my office where she can spread out charts and graphs and play the expert. And then I let her talk. I ask questions that will get her to explain exactly how she acquired your father's property and what her plans are for it. The more details she gives, the more evidence we have. Naomi nodded. What's my role in this? Gabriel hesitated. That's the tricky part. I need you to stay completely hidden until the right moment. Tiffany can't know you're involved, or she'll realize it's a trap. But I want to confront her. I want to tell her exactly what I think of people who steal from grieving families. And you will, Gabriel promised. But not until after we have her confession on camera. Once we have that, you can say whatever you want to her. They spent the rest of the weekend going over every detail. Gabriel showed Naomi the conference room where the meeting would take place, pointed out the hidden cameras, explained how the recording system worked. They practiced questions and responses until Naomi could predict exactly how Gabriel would handle each part of the conversation. On Monday morning, Gabriel called Tiffany Morgan. Miss Morgan? This is Gabriel Stone. I've been thinking about your proposal regarding the Roberts property. Naomi sat beside him, listening on speakerphone as Tiffany's voice came through bright and eager. Mr. Stone, I'm so glad you called. I knew you'd see the potential. I'm very interested, Gabriel said smoothly. But before I commit to anything, I'd like to understand the full scope of what you're proposing. Could we meet to discuss details? Absolutely. I have extensive market research and projections I'd love to share with you. When works best? Gabriel looked at Naomi, who nodded. Wednesday afternoon? Say 3 o'clock? Perfect. Should we meet at the property itself so I can show you the possibilities? Actually, I'd prefer to meet in my office. I have some documents I'd like to review with you as well. Even better. Professional environment for a professional opportunity. After Gabriel hung up, he turned to Naomi. She sounds confident. She sounds arrogant, Naomi corrected. She really thinks she's going to get away with this. Good. Arrogant people make mistakes. On Tuesday, Naomi's divorce lawyer called with an update. Richard is willing to cooperate fully, the lawyer reported. He's admitted to the affair and to selling the property without your consent. He seems genuinely remorseful. Is remorse going to get my father's store back? Naomi asked. No, but his testimony might help if you decide to pursue charges against the other woman involved. That evening, Naomi met Gabriel for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. They had become comfortable together over the past week, bonding over their shared goal and their respect for her father's memory. Gabriel was easy to talk to, and he listened with the kind of attention she hadn't gotten from Richard in years. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Gabriel asked over dessert. Terrified, Naomi admitted. What if this doesn't work? What if she's smarter than we think? Then we'll try something else, Gabriel said calmly. Naomi, whatever happens tomorrow, we're not giving up. Your father's legacy is worth fighting for. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly. I mean, really? You could just keep the store, run it however you want. Why risk getting involved in all this drama? Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember a little girl who used to come to your father's store every Saturday? Dark hair, always carrying a notebook? Naomi thought back. Maybe. Dad had a lot of young customers. That was my daughter, Sophie. She's grown up now in college, but when she was 8 and 9 years old, your father's store was her favorite place in the world. Gabriel's voice grew soft with memory. Her mother and I were going through a difficult divorce. Sophie was angry and confused, and she started acting out at school. I'm sorry. Your father noticed. He started setting aside books he thought she might like. Adventure stories with strong young heroines. Books about kids who overcame difficult situations. Every Saturday he'd have something new for her. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. That sounded exactly like something her father would do. Sophie started writing her own stories, Gabriel continued. Your father encouraged her, let her read them to other kids during story time. He treated her like her ideas mattered, like she was important. It changed her whole attitude about herself. Where is she now? Gabriel smiled with pride. Studying creative writing at Northwestern University. She wants to be a children's book author. She says your father taught her that books can save people. He believed that, Naomi whispered. So do I. And that's why I'm helping you. Your father saved my daughter during the hardest time in her life. The least I can do is save his legacy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both thinking about Eleanor Roberts and the quiet way he had touched people's lives. Tomorrow we get justice for him, Gabriel said finally. Tomorrow, Naomi agreed, we destroy Tiffany Morgan. Wednesday morning arrived gray and rainy, matching Naomi's nervous energy. She arrived at Gabriel's office building an hour before the meeting, using the employee entrance to avoid being seen in the lobby. Gabriel had arranged for her to wait in a small office next to the conference room, where she could listen through the shared wall and watch the meeting on a computer monitor connected to the security cameras. At exactly 3 o'clock, the receptionist announced Tiffany Morgan's arrival. Naomi watched on the monitor as a woman in an expensive red suit clicked into the conference room on 4-inch heels. She was younger than Naomi had expected, probably in her late 20s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of aggressive confidence that some people mistake for competence. Mr. Stone, Tiffany said, extending a manicured hand. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Gabriel stood to greet her, playing his role perfectly. Ms. Morgan, please have a seat. I'm very interested to hear your ideas. Tiffany opened a leather portfolio and spread papers across the conference table. I think you're going to be amazed at the profit potential here. The Roberts property is sitting on a gold mine. Tell me more, Gabriel said, settling back in his chair. Location, 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 Tiffany said with obvious enthusiasm. That corner has been underutilized for decades. An old man selling dusty books to retirees and college students. But look at what's happening in the neighborhood. She pointed to a map marked with colored dots. 3 new apartment complexes within 4 blocks. A gourmet market opening next month. A yoga studio and boutique coffee shop already drawing young professionals to the area. Interesting, Gabriel said mildly. And you think the bookstore doesn't fit this new demographic? Absolutely not. Young professionals want convenience, style, modern amenities. They want a place to grab expensive coffee and artisanal pastries before work, not somewhere to browse old novels. Tiffany's voice grew more excited. But the building has perfect bones for conversion. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, lots of natural light. We could turn it into exactly what the neighborhood needs. Naomi watched Gabriel nod thoughtfully. What did you have in mind? Upscale cafe on the main floor, maybe with a small boutique section selling local crafts and gifts. We could convert the apartment upstairs into office space for rent. Freelancers and small businesses would pay premium prices for that kind of character space downtown. That does sound profitable, Gabriel said. But I have to ask, how did you acquire the property so easily? I understand the owner had just passed away. This was the critical moment. Naomi leaned forward, watching Tiffany's face on the monitor. Tiffany's smile became sharper, more predatory. That's where my expertise really paid off. I've learned that timing is everything in this business. You have to identify opportunities before other people notice them. Opportunities? Distressed situations, Tiffany said matter-of-factly. Death, divorce, financial crisis, these create motivated sellers who need to move quickly. The key is positioning yourself to help when they're ready to sell. How did you position yourself with the Roberts family? Tiffany laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. That was actually easier than I expected. The old man's daughter was completely overwhelmed by grief. She could barely function, let alone handle complex financial decisions. But the husband Richard, he understood the reality of their situation. What situation was that? He had significant debts that his wife didn't know about. Gambling addiction. He needed cash fast before his wife discovered the truth and before his creditors got impatient. Tiffany sorted through her papers with satisfaction. I met Richard at one of the casinos I frequent for business networking. He was desperate and ashamed. Perfect combination for my purposes. Gabriel kept his expression neutral. So you approached him about selling? Not exactly. First, I helped him understand the scope of his problem. Some of those casino debts can become dangerous if they're not paid promptly. Richard needed to appreciate just how serious his situation was. Naomi felt sick. Tiffany was describing how she had deliberately made Richard's gambling addiction worse. You helped increase his debts, Gabriel said carefully. I introduced him to some higher stakes games, Tiffany said with a shrug. Richard was going to gamble anyway. At least this way he could see the full picture of what he was dealing with. And it made him much more motivated to find a solution. The solution being selling his wife's inheritance. The solution being liquidating an underperforming asset to address a family financial crisis, Tiffany corrected smoothly. It was actually the responsible thing to do. Gabriel leaned forward. But the wife didn't know about the sale. The wife was in no condition to make rational financial decisions. She was completely focused on the past, on preserving some sentimental shrine to her dead father. Meanwhile, her husband was facing real threats from real people who wanted real money. Tiffany's voice grew impatient. Someone had to be the adult in that situation. So you convinced Richard to sell without his wife's knowledge. I convinced Richard to take action to protect his family, Tiffany said firmly. The wife would have said no if we'd asked her, because she was too emotional to see the bigger picture. But Richard had legal authority as her husband to make the sale, especially during her period of grief. We made sure everything was completely legal. Gabriel nodded slowly. And profitable for you. Tiffany smiled. That's what I do, Mr. Stone. I find solutions that work for everyone. Richard got enough money to pay his debts and save his marriage. You got a valuable property at a fair price. And I get a finder's fee for bringing everyone together. What about the wife? The wife gets to move on with her life instead of being trapped by the past. Honestly, we probably did her a favor. That bookstore was just a reminder of her loss. Now she can focus on the future. Naomi had heard enough. She stood up from her chair, ready to storm into the conference room and tell Tiffany Morgan exactly what she thought of people who helped by stealing from grieving families. But Gabriel's voice stopped her. That's a very interesting perspective, Gabriel said calmly. Now, Tell me about your plans for maximizing profit on the resale. Naomi sat back down. Gabriel was right, they needed to get Tiffany's complete confession on camera before confronting her. But listening to this woman talk about destroying her father's legacy as if it were a business favor was almost unbearable. I have 3 potential buyers lined up, Tiffany said, pulling out another folder. All developers looking for exactly this kind of property in exactly this location. We could start a bidding war and easily get 40% more than you paid. 40%? Possibly more. These developers have been waiting for properties like this to come on the market. They'll pay premium prices to get in early on the neighborhood's transformation. And the bookstore customers? The community that used the space. Tiffany waved dismissively. They'll find somewhere else to buy books. There are plenty of chain stores and online options. Progress requires change, Mr. Stone. You can't preserve the past forever. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, letting Tiffany's words hang in the air. Then he said, Ms. Morgan, I think we should discuss next steps. Absolutely, Tiffany said eagerly. When do you want to put the property back on the market? Actually, Gabriel said, his voice growing colder, I think we should discuss the legal ramifications of fraud and theft. Tiffany's smile faltered. I'm sorry, what? You've just admitted on camera to deliberately manipulating a gambling addict into stealing his wife's inheritance. That's not business, Ms. Morgan. That's a crime. Tiffany looked around the conference room, noticing the cameras for the first time. Her face went pale under her makeup. I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard you confess to targeting vulnerable people and exploiting their trauma for profit. I heard you admit to increasing Richard Roberts' gambling debts to manipulate him into betraying his wife. Tiffany stood up quickly. This meeting is over. No, said a new voice from the doorway. It's just beginning. Naomi stepped into the conference room, and Tiffany Morgan finally got to meet Eleanor Roberts' daughter face to face. The color drained from Tiffany's face as she stared at Naomi. For several seconds, the only sound in the conference room was the rain hitting the windows 20 floors above the street. You, Tiffany whispered. Me, Naomi said, walking slowly into the room. Eleanor Roberts' daughter. The woman whose father's legacy you stole while she was grieving. Tiffany's shock quickly transformed into anger. You set me up. You set yourself up, Gabriel said calmly. We just gave you the opportunity to tell the truth about what you did. What I did was completely legal, Tiffany snapped, her composure cracking. Your husband had every right to sell that property. My husband was a gambling addict who you deliberately manipulated, Naomi said, her voice steady but deadly quiet. You increased his debts, seduced him, and convinced him to steal from his grieving wife. That's not legal. That's predatory. Tiffany looked between Naomi and Gabriel, clearly trying to calculate her options. You have no proof of anything improper. Gabriel touched a button on the conference table and Tiffany's voice filled the room. I introduced him to some higher stakes games. Richard was going to gamble anyway at least. This way he could see the full picture of what he was dealing with. And it made him much more motivated to find a solution. That sounds like proof to me, Gabriel said. Tiffany's lawyer training kicked in. That could be interpreted many ways. I was helping a client understand his financial situation. Really? Naomi said. Let's hear how you were helping. Gabriel pressed the button again. The wife would have said no if we'd asked her, because she was too emotional to see the bigger picture. But Richard had legal authority as her husband to make the sale, especially during her period of grief. You're admitting you deliberately circumvented my consent, Naomi said. You knew I would refuse, so you manipulated my husband into betraying me. Tiffany straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her aggressive confidence. I helped a family resolve a financial crisis. If your marriage was so weak that your husband had to lie to you about his problems, that's not my fault. You're right, Naomi said, surprising everyone in the room. My husband's choices are his responsibility, but your choices are yours. And you chose to target a grieving woman through her addicted husband. You chose to steal a family legacy for profit. Those were your decisions. I didn't steal anything, Tiffany insisted. I facilitated a legal transaction between consenting adults. Gabriel leaned forward. Ms. Morgan, would you like to hear what our lawyers think about your methods? I'd like to leave, Tiffany said, gathering her papers. This meeting is over. Actually, Naomi said, we're just getting started. Sit down. Something in Naomi's voice made Tiffany stop moving. The younger woman looked at her with newfound wariness. We know about your other deals, Gabriel said. The widow you convinced to sell her husband's garage for half its value. The divorcing man whose restaurant you flipped for triple what he got. Those were legitimate transactions. Those were a pattern of exploitation, Naomi interrupted. And now we have evidence of how you operate. You target people in crisis, manipulate their vulnerabilities and steal their assets. Tiffany sat back down slowly. What do you want? Gabriel and Naomi exchanged glances. This was the moment they had planned for. First, Gabriel said, you're going to transfer ownership of Eleanor Roberts' bookstore back to his daughter. That's impossible. You bought it legally. I can't force you to sell. You're not forcing me to do anything, Gabriel said smoothly. I'm choosing to sell it back to Ms. Roberts for exactly what I paid for it. All you have to do is facilitate the paperwork. I don't understand your angle, Tiffany said suspiciously. My angle is justice, Gabriel replied. And preservation of something valuable that you tried to destroy. What's in it for you? Tiffany asked. The satisfaction of doing the right thing, Gabriel said simply. You might try it sometime. Tiffany turned to Naomi. Fine. You can have your precious bookstore back. But you're getting a building with no inventory, no customer base and no cash flow. You'll lose everything trying to rebuild it. That's my problem, Naomi said. Not yours. What else? Tiffany asked, clearly expecting more demands. You're going to confess to the real estate licensing board about your unethical practices, Gabriel said. Absolutely not. Gabriel pressed another button and Tiffany's voice filled the room again. I've learned that timing is everything in this business. You have to identify opportunities before other people notice them. Distress situations. Death, divorce, financial crisis, these create motivated sellers who need to move quickly. The licensing board will be very interested in how you identify and exploit distressed situations, Gabriel said. Especially when we provide them with evidence of your pattern of targeting vulnerable people. Tiffany's mask of confidence was completely gone now. You're trying to destroy my career. No, Naomi said firmly. You destroyed your career when you decided to steal from people who were already suffering. We're just making sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. And the third thing, Gabriel continued, you're going to pay restitution to your other victims. Starting with the widow whose garage you stole. I didn't steal anything. Tiffany exploded. I'm a businesswoman. I find opportunities and capitalize on them. That's not a crime. Capitalizing on opportunities is business, Naomi said. Manipulating addicts and targeting grieving families is predatory behavior. There's a difference. Tiffany stared at them both, clearly trying to find a way out. What if I refuse? Gabriel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we release all of this evidence to the police, the licensing board, and the local media. The story of a real estate agent who seduces gambling addicts to steal from their grieving wives would make excellent television. You're blackmailing me. We're offering you a choice, Naomi corrected. Face the consequences of your actions voluntarily, or face them involuntarily. But either way you're going to face them. Tiffany was quiet for a long moment, staring at the conference table. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with hate. I want to speak to my lawyer. Of course, Gabriel said. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, we start making phone calls. This isn't over, Tiffany said, standing up and grabbing her purse. Yes, it is, Naomi said quietly. You lost the moment you decided to steal from my father's daughter. You just didn't know it yet. After Tiffany left, Naomi collapsed into a chair, emotionally drained. Do you think she'll cooperate? Gabriel was reviewing the camera footage on his laptop. She doesn't have much choice. We have her admitting to everything on multiple cameras. Her lawyer will tell her to take the deal. And if she doesn't? Gabriel's expression was grim. Then we destroy her the hard way. But I think she's smart enough to know when she's beaten. Naomi looked out at the rain falling on the city below. I want my father's store back. You'll have it, Gabriel promised. And when you do, we're going to make it better than it ever was before. For the first time in weeks, Naomi smiled with genuine happiness. Yes, we are. 24 hours later, Tiffany Morgan's lawyer called Gabriel's office. The conversation was brief and tense, but the message was clear. His client would agree to the terms, but she wanted one final meeting to discuss the details. Gabriel was suspicious. Why does she need another meeting? The terms are simple. She says she wants to apologize to Ms. Roberts personally, the lawyer explained. Professional courtesy. Naomi laughed bitterly when Gabriel told her. Professional courtesy? She wants to try to manipulate us one more time. Probably, Gabriel agreed. But it doesn't matter. We have everything we need to destroy her if she tries anything. And I want to see her face when she realizes she's lost. They arranged to meet Friday afternoon in the same conference room. This time, Gabriel's lawyer was present, along with a court reporter to document everything that was said. If Tiffany wanted a final confrontation, they would make sure it was legally binding. Tiffany arrived 15 minutes late, accompanied by an expensive-looking lawyer in a tailored suit. She had abandoned her previous confident appearance. Her hair was pulled back severely, she wore minimal makeup, and her dark suit made her look like she was attending a funeral. In a way, she was the funeral of her career. "Ms. Roberts," Tiffany said as she sat down, "I want to apologize for any pain I may have caused you." "May have caused," Naomi repeated. "There's no may about it, Tiffany. You destroyed my father's legacy while I was grieving his death. You seduced my husband and convinced him to steal from me. You caused enormous pain and you did it deliberately." Tiffany's lawyer put a warning hand on her arm, but she shook him off. "Your father's bookstore was failing anyway. The neighborhood is changing and small bookstores can't compete with online retailers. I actually saved you from losing money on a doomed business venture." Gabriel leaned forward. "Ms. Morgan, are you sure you want to take that approach? Because we still have the option of releasing your confession to the media." "Let me be clear about something," Naomi said, her voice growing stronger. "My father's bookstore wasn't failing. It was profitable. It served the community. And it was mine to decide what to do with, not yours to steal." "I didn't steal anything," Tiffany insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "The sale was legal." "Legal and ethical aren't the same thing," Gabriel said. "You manipulated a gambling addict and exploited a grieving daughter. That might be technically legal, but it's morally reprehensible." Tiffany's mask of contrition finally cracked completely. "You want to know the truth? Your husband came to me for help. He was desperate and scared, and he needed someone to show him how to solve his problems. I gave him a solution." "You gave him a way to betray his wife," Naomi corrected. "I gave him a way to save his marriage." Tiffany snapped. "Do you think your relationship would have survived if you discovered his gambling debts on your own? If creditors had started calling your house, threatening both of you? That's not your decision to make," Naomi said firmly. "My marriage was my business. My father's store was my inheritance. You had no right to insert yourself into either situation." "I had every right to pursue legitimate business opportunities," Tiffany said, her old arrogance returning. "Your husband was an adult who made his own choices. After you manipulated him into making them," Gabriel pointed out. Tiffany turned to him with obvious hatred. "And what's your excuse, Mr. Stone? You're sitting there acting morally superior, but you bought the store knowing it was being sold under questionable circumstances." "I bought the store because I was told the owner wanted to sell it quickly due to grief," Gabriel replied calmly. "When I learned the truth, I decided to return it to its rightful owner." "How noble of you," Tiffany said sarcastically. "I'm sure your motives are completely pure." Gabriel's expression hardened. "My motives are irrelevant to this conversation. We're here to discuss your confession and the terms of your cooperation." Tiffany's lawyer leaned over to whisper in her ear. She listened for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she said. "I'll transfer the necessary paperwork to return ownership of the property to Ms. Roberts. I'll pay restitution to the other families who feel they were treated unfairly. And I'll cooperate with any licensing board investigation." "And?" Gabriel prompted. Tiffany glared at him. "And I'll confess to targeting vulnerable people for business opportunities. In writing," Naomi added. "With specific details about your methods." "Fine," Tiffany said through gritted teeth. Gabriel's lawyer produced a prepared document. "This agreement outlines all the terms we've discussed. Sign it and this matter is resolved. Refuse and we proceed with criminal and civil charges." Tiffany read through the document slowly, her lawyer reading over her shoulder. Finally, she signed her name with sharp, angry strokes. "There," she said, throwing down the pen. "Are you satisfied?" "Not quite," Naomi said. She stood up and walked around the conference table to face Tiffany directly. "I want you to understand something. You didn't just steal a building from me. You stole my father's legacy. You stole memories and dreams and plans that can never be replaced." Tiffany looked uncomfortable but didn't respond. "My father spent 30 years building that bookstore," Naomi continued. "He knew every customer by name. He recommended books to children who became lifelong readers. He created a place where people could discover new ideas and connect with their community." "It was just a business," Tiffany mumbled. "No, it wasn't," It was a life's work. It was love made visible. And you tried to destroy it for money. Naomi leaned closer. You're going to lose your real estate license. Your reputation is ruined. Your business is finished. Do you know why? Tiffany shook her head. Because some things are more important than profit. Because there are people in this world who will fight to protect what matters. And because you picked the wrong family to steal from. Tiffany finally looked directly at Naomi, and for the first time, there was something like shame in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, you're not, Naomi said. You're sorry you got caught. But that's enough for me. She returned to her seat. Gabriel's lawyer collected the signed documents. Ms. Morgan, Gabriel said formally, you have 48 hours to begin the property transfer process and 7 days to make the first restitution payment. Any failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. Tiffany and her lawyer left without another word. After they were gone, Naomi sat quietly in the conference room, feeling emotionally drained but oddly satisfied. How do you feel? Gabriel asked. Like I can breathe again, Naomi said. She's going to lose everything, isn't she? Everything professional, yes. Her real estate license, her business, her reputation in the industry. She'll have to start over in a completely different field. Good, Naomi said firmly. People who prey on grieving families deserve to face consequences. Gabriel began packing up his papers. What about Richard? What are you going to do about your marriage? Naomi had been thinking about that question for days. The divorce papers will be final next week. Richard can start over too, but he'll do it without me. Any regrets? About the divorce? No. Richard made his choices. But I do feel sorry for him. Tiffany used his addiction against him, and in a way he was as much her victim as I was. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. Addiction makes people vulnerable to manipulation. That's why what she did was so evil. But Richard still chose to have an affair. He still chose to lie to me and steal from me. Tiffany gave him the opportunity, but he took it. They walked out of the building together, stepping into the cool evening air. For the first time in weeks, Naomi felt like the weight on her shoulders was lifting. So what now? Gabriel asked. Naomi smiled. Now we rebuild my father's bookstore. Better than before. Partners? Gabriel extended his hand. Partners? Naomi agreed, shaking it firmly. As they walked toward their cars, Naomi realized that in fighting to reclaim her father's legacy, she had found something else valuable. An ally who shared her values and her vision for the future. Tiffany Morgan had tried to destroy her life, but instead she had accidentally led Naomi to the beginning of something new and wonderful. The next few weeks moved quickly. True to her signed agreement, Tiffany Morgan initiated the property transfer process, though she did it with obvious reluctance and minimal communication. Gabriel's lawyers handled most of the details, ensuring that every aspect of the transaction was properly documented. The real estate licensing board moved faster than anyone expected. Within 10 days of receiving Tiffany's confession and the supporting evidence, they suspended her license pending a full investigation. The local news picked up the story after Gabriel's lawyer tipped them off. Real estate agent admits to targeting grieving families, made for compelling television. Naomi watched the news coverage from Gabriel's living room, where they had been planning the bookstore's reopening. The reporter interviewed several of Tiffany's previous victims, including the elderly widow whose husband's garage had been sold for half its value. It feels good to have someone finally listen, the widow said on camera. I tried to tell people what she did to me, but no one believed that someone would take advantage of an old woman who just lost her husband. Now people know, Naomi said to Gabriel. Tiffany can't hurt anyone else. Gabriel handed her a cup of coffee. The licensing board says she'll never work in real estate again. And 3 of her victims are filing civil suits for damages. What about the criminal charges? The prosecutor's office is reviewing the evidence. Your husband's testimony will be crucial if they decide to file fraud charges. Richard had been surprisingly cooperative throughout the process. He had provided detailed statements about how Tiffany had manipulated his gambling addiction, increased his debts, and convinced him to sell the bookstore without Naomi's knowledge. His testimony painted a clear picture of a predator who targeted vulnerable people systematically. Have you talked to him recently? Gabriel asked carefully. Yesterday, Naomi said. He's in counseling for his gambling addiction and he's found a new job. He says he wants to pay me back for what he stole. How do you feel about that? Naomi considered the question. Glad that he's getting help. But it doesn't change what happened between us. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Gabriel nodded. Trust is fragile. Once it's broken completely, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Almost impossible, Naomi agreed. But not completely impossible with the right person. She looked at Gabriel as she said it, and he met her eyes with understanding. Over the past month, they had worked together closely, and Naomi had found herself trusting Gabriel in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in years. He was honest, dependable, and he shared her values about what mattered in life. Their relationship had evolved naturally from business partnership to friendship to something deeper. Gabriel never pushed, never presumed, but he was always there when she needed support or encouragement. When she had bad days missing her father, Gabriel listened. When she felt overwhelmed by the legal proceedings, Gabriel handled the details. When she doubted whether she could successfully rebuild the bookstore, Gabriel reminded her of her father's faith in her abilities. Speaking of which, Gabriel said, reaching for a folder on the coffee table, I have some good news about the bookstore. What kind of good news? Gabriel spread out several documents. I've been quietly buying back your father's inventory from the people who purchased it at the estate sale. Most of them were dealers who were happy to resell at a reasonable profit. Naomi looked at the list of recovered books, recognizing many titles that had been special to her father. Gabriel, this must have cost you thousands. It was an investment in our partnership, Gabriel said simply. Besides, these books belong in your father's store. Our store, Naomi corrected. If we're partners, it's our store. Gabriel smiled. Our store then. They spent the afternoon planning the grand reopening. Gabriel had connections with local media, and Naomi knew many of the former customers who would help spread the word. They decided to make it a celebration of community and literacy, with special events for children and a memorial display honoring Eleanor Roberts' vision for the store. I want to do story time again, Naomi said. The way my father did it. Every Saturday morning. That sounds perfect. What about expanding the community programs? Book clubs for different age groups. Writing workshops. Maybe poetry readings in the evening. Naomi's excitement was building. We could partner with the local schools for literacy programs. I love all of that, Gabriel said. Your father would be proud. That evening, as they walked through the empty bookstore building soon to be filled with books and customers again, Naomi felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. Tiffany was wrong about one thing, she told Gabriel as they stood in what would be the children's section. What's that? She said progress requires change and you can't preserve the past forever. But that's not true. Some things from the past are worth preserving because they make the future better. Gabriel looked around the empty space, clearly seeing the same vision Naomi did. Your father's legacy isn't in the past. It's in the future, and all the children who will discover reading here, all the community connections that will be made, all the lives that will be touched by books. And it's in the people who fought to save it, Naomi added, looking directly at Gabriel. Even if they fell in love in the process? Gabriel asked softly. Naomi moved closer to him. Especially then. When Gabriel kissed her, it felt like a promise. Not just of love, but of partnership, shared values, and a future built on trust and mutual respect. Everything Richard had failed to give her, Gabriel offered naturally. As they held each other in the empty bookstore that would soon be full of life again, Naomi realized that Tiffany Morgan had inadvertently given her a gift. In trying to destroy Eleanor Roberts' legacy, she had brought together two people who would make that legacy stronger than ever. Justice had been served. Tiffany had lost her license, her reputation, and her business. Richard had lost his marriage and was facing the consequences of his addiction and betrayal. The victims of Tiffany's schemes were getting restitution and vindication. But more importantly, the things that truly mattered, love, integrity, community, and the power of books to change lives, had been preserved and would flourish again. Eleanor Roberts would have been proud of his daughter and the man who had helped her fight for what was right. 6 months later, Naomi stood behind the restored antique cash register, watching a little girl with pigtails carefully count out coins to buy her first chapter book. The sound of the register, which Gabriel had rescued and refurbished, brought back memories of her father, but they were happy memories now, not painful ones. That's a wonderful choice, Naomi told the girl, wrapping the book in tissue paper the way her father always had. Come back and tell me what you think of it. The little girl beamed and ran to show her mother the book. Naomi watched them leave, then looked around at the bustling store. The grand reopening 3 months ago had been beyond their wildest dreams. The community had embraced the restored bookstore with enthusiasm, and the customer base was larger than it had ever been in her father's time. Gabriel emerged from the back office, carrying a box of new arrivals. The children's author is here for the reading tonight, he said, setting down the box. Sophie's excited to meet some of her fans. Gabriel's daughter had become one of the store's most popular regular readers. Her first children's book, inspired by her memories of Eleanor Roberts and his store, was selling well, and tonight she would be reading from it to a packed audience. "Any word on the Tiffany Morgan situation?" Naomi asked. Gabriel's expression grew serious. "The criminal trial starts next month. The prosecutor says they have a strong case for fraud and conspiracy charges." Tiffany's downfall had been swift and complete. After losing her real estate license, she had tried to start a consulting business, but news of her confession and methods had followed her. No one would work with her. The civil suits from her victims had resulted in substantial judgments against her, and she had been forced to declare bankruptcy. Meanwhile, the people she had hurt were rebuilding their lives. The widow whose garage had been stolen used her restitution money to start a small craft business. The man whose restaurant Tiffany had flipped opened a new place across town. And Naomi had her father's bookstore back, better than ever. "I almost feel sorry for her," Naomi said, and she meant it. She destroyed her entire life for money that didn't even make her happy. "Some people never learn the difference between success and fulfillment," Gabriel observed. Tiffany thought having more money would solve all her problems, so she kept taking it from other people. "While we learned that the best things in life can't be bought," Naomi said, smiling at her partner and soon-to-be husband. Gabriel had proposed 2 months ago in the children's section of the store, and they were planning a small wedding for the spring. "Speaking of which," Gabriel said, pulling an envelope from his pocket, "this came in today's mail." Naomi recognized the letterhead of a major publishing company. She opened it carefully and read the contents twice before looking up at Gabriel with wide eyes. "They want to buy the rights to our story," she said in amazement. "A movie deal. Hollywood wants to make a film about a bookstore?" Gabriel asked, amused. "About fighting for what matters," Naomi corrected. "About how love and integrity can overcome greed and betrayal. About second chances and new beginnings." Gabriel took her hand. "What do you think?" Naomi looked around the store. Customers browsed the shelves, children sat in reading circles, teenagers did homework at the study tables Gabriel had added. The coffee corner was busy with people meeting friends and discussing books. The upstairs had been converted into space for writing workshops and book clubs. This wasn't just a bookstore anymore. It was a community center, a place where people connected over shared ideas and stories. It was everything her father had dreamed it could be and more. "I think my father would love the idea that his story might inspire other people," Naomi said. "But we'd have to make sure they tell it right." "No Hollywood ending where the wife goes back to the cheating husband?" Gabriel asked with a grin. "Definitely not," Naomi said firmly. "Some betrayals can't be forgiven. But the ending is still happy she found something better." "Much better," Gabriel agreed, leaning down to kiss her. As evening fell, they prepared for Sophie's reading. Gabriel set up chairs while Naomi arranged refreshments. The store filled with families, elderly book lovers, teenagers, and young professionals, the full range of the community they served. Sophie read beautifully from her book about a young girl who found magic in an old bookstore and learned that books could transport you anywhere and help you become anyone. The audience was captivated, especially the children who saw themselves in the story. After the reading, as they cleaned up and closed the store, Naomi felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 6 months ago, she had been a grieving daughter whose inheritance had been stolen by her cheating husband and his manipulative girlfriend. She had felt broken, betrayed, and hopeless. Now she was a successful business owner, a beloved community member, and a woman in love with a man who shared her values and dreams. She had justice for the wrongs committed against her, but more importantly, she had built something positive from the ashes of her loss. "Regrets?" Gabriel asked as they turned off the lights. "Only one," Naomi said, taking his hand as they walked toward the door. "I wish my father could see what we've built here." "Maybe he can," Gabriel said softly. "I think love like his doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of the foundation for what comes next." As they locked up and headed home together, Naomi realized that Gabriel was right. Her father's love, his belief in the power of books and community, his faith in her abilities, all of that lived on in the store they had rebuilt and the life they were creating together. Tiffany Morgan had tried to destroy Eleanor Roberts' legacy, but she had failed completely. The legacy was stronger than ever, and it would continue to touch lives for generations to come. That was the best revenge of all, not just surviving the betrayal, but thriving beyond it and creating something beautiful in its place. Richard had lost everything that mattered. His wife, his home, his reputation, his future. Tiffany had lost her career, her freedom, and any chance of happiness built on other people's pain. But Naomi had found everything she needed: love, purpose, community, and the satisfaction of preserving what truly mattered. As she and Gabriel walked home under the stars, Naomi felt her father's presence like a blessing. He would have loved Gabriel, would have approved of their partnership, would have been proud of the way she had fought for his legacy and won. The story that had begun with theft and betrayal was ending with love and triumph. And the best part was, it wasn't really ending at all, it was just beginning.